Okay, thank you very much. We're starting now. So this is my talk about, well, user-centric approach to Bidi user interfaces. Covers, let's say, over 30 years of experience working with right-to-left interfaces, but also especially Apple very kindly gave me the chance to apply this in the real world in their iWork suite. So here is my example of what Bidi is all about. This is the Bidi maze, where you've got the start and the beginning, but no end. And pretty much this is my life. Let's say it's job security for one thing, but for another thing is every time a new innovation comes out, you're fixing Bidi all over again. So let's talk about my inspirations behind this. Oh, did you want to take a photo of that? It's okay. Go on, take a photo. There's the name of the artist as well. So when you see your photo, you can find the artist. But the inspiration, so let's say if we go back, start with in the beginning. I'm going maybe a few thousand years too far back, but here is the very earliest of writing systems, the cuneiform. And in those days, they actually worshipped the god of writing. And that god was symbolized by the tablet and pen, which kind of strangely looks like an iPad. But also, if you look at the way they're praying, very similar to these days as well. So yeah, maybe we've gone around. But this is where I began. It was the Apple II. We started with the Apple IIe, if you want to date me to that very specific year. And this is the company that I worked with called Diwan, where we created an Arabic system for a desktop computer. And in those days, we were reimagining right to left from the very beginning. And we adopted a word processor called Format 80, which effectively mimicked the typewriter. I highlighted a bit of text in here. Adding, this is from 1984, a review, adding to the visual approach, this is a what you see is what you get processor. Like maybe that's the very first usage of WYSIWYG. So you know exactly what the printed page it looks like, and it goes on to say it emulated the typewriter. So you could just put a flashing caret somewhere as if that's where your virtual typewriter head goes, and just type anywhere. So it was great. We were able to do right to left. People worked with it. They're able to create like documents and newspapers. And then along came Apple, and they decided, well, actually, let's just match how it's stored in memory on the device. So you now see here, text is just a flow of characters, but that actually matches exactly what's on the device as opposed to what's being printed. So then when this prints, it doesn't look the same. And that kind of set the problems from Bidi from the very beginning. So to give you an example, hang on. I will go to, let's say, a traditional right-to-left word processor. I thought I wouldn't call out any of the companies who do word processors here. I'll just go to, this is just a standard web editor. But you get situations where if I select and select like this, you have a selection that splits into three. And for a user, when they see this, it's kind of confusing. I mean, as an engineer, when I look at this, I can say, oh yeah, there's the first character, which is the number 3, and there's the last character. In the backing store, those are all just contiguous. So I've just got a starting point, which is a 3, and this is the number of characters following, and it just highlights that. But for a user who wants to say, highlight this word and the 1, 2, 3, 4, suddenly it splits, and it's just not obvious what to do. Things have improved since then, because now if I highlight over the 1, it selects everything in between. But it's very confusing. It gets even more confusing if you are doing this on a mobile phone interface where you're actually dragging a little handle around and trying to figure out what's going on. So since I've been doing Bidi for this long, and I knew the world before the backing store word processor, I thought, well, how do we approach this? How do we deal with viewing Bidi from the point of view of somebody who just wants to use it, as opposed to, oh, this is convenient for us engineers? And I really came upon the whole idea of saying, okay, let's do this visually. So we're talking about making the selections visual, making the caret handling visual. And this is very subtle. So I'm going to be jumping in and out of these slides and showing examples as I go through it. And feel free, if I'm sort of going too fast, jump in and ask me what I mean by this. But the whole approach was to take this visually and then make it just work. So just to give you an idea, so of course, I'm sure a lot of people here know what Bidi is, but just as a refresher so that we're on the same page. Arabic, we call it Bidi because text is right to left, but the numbers are left to right. So even within the same language, you've got two directions going on, and symbols can be either. So this is, I just typed 1, 2, 3, 4 with 2 dots. So the 1, 2 will flip with the 3, 4. But if it's 1 dot, it's a period, so it's 1, 2.34. And that's strange for people to imagine, but that means the symbols themselves create additional complexity. And then we've got the Unicode Bidi algorithm that sort of tries to resolve these cases for you based on that text. So if you look at a normal selection, that was the selection I showed you, that's complex for the user to understand, simple for the engineer, because it's just, this is the range of characters to highlight, you draw a box around those. What I wanted to get through is this, which is a visual selection. So you're now just selecting across the text, but now things become complicated for the programmer. So let's take an example. I'll take, here is pages, and when I drag across, it just drags across, which is great. And you have even more complicated, because if I drag across here and I go down to here, now I've got multiple selections going on in the actual text itself. It's a simple looking rectangle that I'm just painting across the text. I view it like painting a selection, but this gets really complicated because I could select cases like here where I've just selected the first and last word of the text. And if I make it smaller, the selection, well, I'm gonna get to that point just now in this talk, but the point here is these selections look complicated, but really easy for the user to create because they can just go backwards and forwards all the time. When I got this first working, I used to just sit there just doing that and thinking, whoa. But the same thing with digits. So again, Arabic with digits, you can go here. So that's your visual selection. And go back to my talk. So as I said, it's simple rectangle, but the actual, it's like consider an array of actual runs that got selected. And there is, of course, a head and tail, which is for if you're doing on a phone, you want to actually select, you're selecting on the head end or the tail end. So the next one is the caret. And this is where things get really subtle, but really complicated, because the caret itself, that's not an easy one to model visually. Let me actually show you the next slide first, because that will give you an idea of the problem. So here is an example of, I've just numbered all the characters and the edges between the characters. So you can see, if you take it here, the caret may just be a single flashing line, but if I've got here just, this is text with a left to right main direction, A, B, C, D, and then there's Elif, Ba, which is character 4. You can see the character in this. Character 4 is Elif, the 5 is the Ba, and then 6 is the Jim, and then 7, character 7 is the number 1, 8 is number 2, and then 9 is D, E, F, so from 9. So, but then depending on the caret is, it could be related to any one of those characters. So if you take the point A here, which is the most complex, that caret could be position 4, which is before the Elif. It could be position 3, really, which is after the D, or it could be position 7, which is before the number 1. But that's just flashing there. And what do you do? How do you handle that case? So let's go back to my example here. So here is that case here. So in this case, if I switch to an Arabic keyboard and I go ahead and type an Arabic letter, it just appears where the caret is. Now, if I go ahead and set my keyboard to Arabic and I type a number, let's take the number 8. Now it just came before the number 1. That's now in a different place in the backing store to where it was, except all I did was I clicked and I type a number, or I click and I type a letter. So what's going on in the background here is we're looking at the context. What is the user thinking when they're typing? And the user is really thinking, okay, I've got a caret here. What do I expect to happen at that caret? And I expect a character to appear at that caret. It's not, this caret is actually flashing in somewhere in the backing store, somewhere in the computer memory. This character is flashing visually for a user. And that's where you've got to say, okay, in this instance, you want this to happen. So I switch now to English. You can do it in Arabic. So I start typing. The character is going to appear there. But then as I'm typing delete, I'm now deleting logically. Because now as a user is deleting the text, they are thinking, okay, I want the last word or letter that I know is coming to be deleted. So now this character has this caret has this dual behavior. And I modeled that by talking about visual versus logical. So now we have another concept of visual versus logical carets. So a visual caret is something that flashes in space. In fact, really all I'm modeling is where to flash it in space, which is saying, here's a character that it's next to, and here's the edge of that character you're going to flash next to. But it doesn't match anything in the backing store. And then for the logical one, then no, what we're saying now is this is a caret that belongs to this text, and let's flash it in the best possible place for the user, which may not be right, but that's what we're doing. And then the behavior happens when you're typing a letter, deleting a letter, inserting text for paste, that kind of thing. So that's the difference between visual and logical. And the switch happens invisibly to the user. It's really based on context. If I've hit the delete key, my caret suddenly becomes logical. If I've clicked with the mouse, the caret is visual because a visual click is a visual caret. So then the next one was I looked at was alignment. Like, what is the alignment of the text? So I can go back to the example again. Let's take, here is 2 examples. I've got text here, and I'm going to switch the text direction. Text. So now this is left to right dominant. You can see that from the period and the paragraph symbol switching. And if I switch to text direction, there it is, that's right to left, now the period is here. So that's switching direction, everyone understands that, but then what happens in a table? Because a table has also the concept of natural direction. So if I now take this table and switch its direction, okay, this changes alignment, but notice the numbers always stay left aligned because the natural alignment for a number is to the left. That's what everyone expects it to be because numbers are entirely left to right. So number tables, we keep them to the left. But then also I can change the alignment specifically for a cell. So I say text and I say, don't be natural anymore, always be to the right. And again, changing the direction of the table changes, but then now because I've explicitly set that direction, it takes that. So we have also the concept of what is a natural alignment versus either left or right. But the user doesn't really see this. We've got this point of, okay, the alignment here is according to a table, but when you see alignment for text, we don't have a separate button for a natural alignment. So that's, again, trying to model in the backing store, or sorry, in the text model, how the user is going to view that text. So back to my presentation. And then we've got another issue is things like dates, things like the sort of things you get imported from Twitter, like naming somebody, hashtagging a subject, and even telephone numbers, because they contain symbols that just will not work within right to left. And how do you solve this issue? In the context of a word processor where we were trying to just say, okay, the user just wants to type. They don't want to worry about, oh, I've got to set this writing direction for this because this is that. And we're applying what is in the Unicode standard is what's called the higher level protocol. So to show you an example of this, let's take this list here. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to say I want to type in that this is first, second, fifth, sixth in Arabic, and I want to type third, fourth here. So I switch to my English keyboard, type third. Now I want an Arabic comma, so I'm going to go back to the Arabic keyboard and hit the comma. Okay, that appears on one side. And then space, English again. So that looks fine. Of course, somebody who knows the Bidi algorithm here, I can see someone smiling and saying, whoa, what happened there? Is that if I did the same thing here in a normal word processor, so again, English keyboard, third, Arabic keyboard, comma, English keyboard, fourth. Wait a minute, what's going on here? And this is a really common use case. Word does this as well because it just annoys the users. You're writing a list and you just can't get the comma to appear in the right place. And that's where you automatically apply the high level protocol. What we're actually looking at is saying, okay, the user is actually typing in Arabic. And when that comes to that comma, let's keep that comma in Arabic. And we do the same thing with the period at the end. So here's a case of that period is on the right to left side because it was typed in Arabic. But if I'm now here in English and I have an English keyboard and I type a period, it's going to appear after the number one because that's where the user intends it to come out. So certain symbols will get that behavior, and it's based upon the usage. And again, we try and hide that from the not hide that, but we hide the complexity of the user, but give them that ability to create their documents just naturally as if they're typing. So I'll go back to presentation. Okay, so that's the high-level protocol. Now, next one is tables. We've got a really nice spreadsheet application in the iWork suite. So here is two tables. I'm going to make one of those tables right to left. In fact, before I make it right to left, I'm just going to move it out of the screen, then make it right to left. So now what we have is a situation where you want to pin the first column of the table, and it's pinning it really nicely. But also, you see the left to right table, it also pins that column there in a left to right way. And the idea here is that you want to be able to handle both right to left and left to right at the same time. I would dare you to try the same in Excel and any other spreadsheet. Let's say it took me more time to get this working in terms of coding than it was to do all of the other right to left stuff. Although when we shipped this, nobody noticed. It just kind of worked the way they expected. And that's really the ideal where you want to be, is that these sorts of things just work. And that's where you've got to view it from the user point of view and not try and compromise from the engineering point of view. So that's the idea of right to left tables. Let's hit play. And then if we go on to the actual user interface design, this is a really great American calligrapher who actually applies Western design. I'll show some more examples of his work, but he applies Western design to Arabic calligraphy, and you just get this incredible mixture of the two cultures. So some subtle things here. So here's an inspector. What we chose to do was make sure that the inspector still does what the user expected, let's say, when it's not to do with textual data information. So for example, the color picker, if you look at it carefully, it doesn't reverse, and that was deliberate. The idea is that the user usually will go to that thing on the other side, on the right-hand side, to pick the color wheel. So we were careful about what to mirror and what not to mirror. So mirroring things which have a next and previous. Things related to text. So a hyperlink is actually say it's going to be a next or previous. And this is a hyperlink inside Pages where it will take you to the next slide. So in a left to right world, the next slide is there, but in a right to left world, the next slide is there. So that really should reverse. But then things we didn't mirror was things like playback, which is not text-based. And sound, well, that actually changed since recently. So latest iPhones actually reversed the sound, but we didn't reverse it at the time because we thought users who are just switching really still expect the sound to be going the same direction. And generally movie playback, what is a rewind for a movie, that kind of thing. And it's always important to consider what is mirroring, what is not mirroring, and look at the idea behind next and previous, text relation versus whether it is something to do with a movie where there's no text involved. The other one we looked at was what is the text direction interface? Now, I think Apple's is one of the worst offenders here when it comes to the writing direction in the text edit application. It's great, you can choose your paragraph default left to right, right to left direction for a paragraph section. Nobody understands what that means. I mean, nobody. Even I had to experiment just to see exactly, oh, what's the difference here? And then you also get in various different word processors left to right. So when I approached that, I thought really direction shouldn't be any more complicated. And I think that you saw that earlier. When I want to go to format, set text direction, I just want to reverse. That's it. So it's either one menu item or it's a single button. There's no need to have, oh, this is left or right, because it's obvious from context. You can see it. This is left to right or right left, just because of the alignment change that goes with it. And that should be enough for a user just to be able to know what they're doing. If they click once, twice, they'll get it. They don't need to be told, oh, that's your direction, and there's a little arrow to go with it, because they don't do that for left to right text. You don't give them arrows to tell them, oh, your next character is always going to appear on the left. And then when you take the UI and you go fully right to left, don't make any compromises. So here is a case where we have to deal with the complexity of actually drawing nice curved lines to say, okay, here's where the comment is on a note. And putting the menus, it took Apple years, but they really delivered when it came to right to left, of putting the menus fully right to left. And these are the things that just make it comfortable for a user to work in a right to left world. I used English menus here just to show an example so that you don't just see Arabic and think, okay, what's going on here? But the idea is that if you're fully right to left interface, make your menus right to left, make the sliding sidebars that come in right to left. So that's my message for this talk, really, is start from the user and then work backwards. Thank you very much.
Great stuff as always.
Thanks.
Really impressive. But one thing I wanted to understand when you do this selection, so it's you've got straightforward visualization, complex stuff going on in the back end, but then if you do a cut and paste, what happens? Because I imagine when you paste, you're going into a potentially different context,
right?
So anyway.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. Hang on, I have hit an interesting. Okay, just delete that. There we go. Okay, so the cut and paste. That's one of them, but the actual even worse one is what happens when someone's collaborating on the same document. Because I've just made a selection. Let's say I've selected these two words here, and I'm playing around with them. Okay, I want to make them blue. Great, and then somebody's editing the document in the background. And how do you make sure, because you've got to see what that person selected, how do you make sure it looks the same in that? And the way I deal with it is once you go outside of the visual world, everything becomes logical again. So as soon as I cut this, it does cut the right characters I've just selected. As you notice, of course, it's become nonsense because I've just deleted the first and last word. But what I've cut is exactly the thing that was selected. So what's happening in the background here is I still have a logical model of what's going on, except this time it's all these little runs of text that cause that selection. So across the wire and anything that is out of the visual world becomes just a series of logical selections. And that means now when I paste it again, it's still those two words that I selected.
All right. And
yeah.
So I guess the question is, that's useful that way for cutting and pasting?
Well, the point.
Or do you just end up, now I've pasted it, now I have to move the individual pieces?
Yeah. The other one is so the point is you cut it. That's what goes into the pasteboard, as it were. Is what words were selected. Right. They sort of just mulch together. I'm not going to expect to cut that and expect it to paste back in exactly the same place as before, because once you've cut it, it's lost that visual connection to the user. And the tricky one is, well, why would you do that to the user? You've just taken these words out of context. But you can see it works really nicely with undo, because of course I'm now undoing back to the visual selections. Oh, sorry, the old logical selections.
Right.
And the reason is that the user usually doesn't end up making these really strange selections here. They're just trying to get to a selection where it's just, let's say, the last Arabic word, the first few English words. But it's the transition from getting to something which is actually useful for the user to where they're going in between. You don't want to start keeping it always looking logical for the backing store, as it were, because the user just wants to just get from one point to the next.
Yeah, I get that. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I've got a question.
Yes.
So obviously an immense amount of work went into planning this and then implementing it. It was a major investment to do this. How have you been able to measure success after you launched it?
Well, we were lucky in the sense that Twitter was actually quite useful at the time. Measure. I guess you got Reddit these days, but you just look at the user comments, because they had been crying out. We didn't have right to left support beforehand. But that was another good thing, was that pages didn't support right to left at all before, and we just went out with this interface straight away day one. And because it came out, users started using it, and you just saw no complaints about visual selection or whatever. They didn't even notice it. That was the great one. And the other one is they did notice it did right to left, and they were able just to use it. That's really where you say, yeah, you got it right. But in terms of something measurable, it's hard to say. Of course, you could sort of take usage analytics of how they use this, but the big one is that users didn't notice.
Nice. Yeah, it can always be a challenge, because I mean, part of my job is marketing internally that we should invest in these types of things, but then have to plan for how we report on the success of it. In the case, I'm at Shutterstock, and where we have UI, web UI languages, that can be a little bit easier, since you can just report on, okay, how many active users and what are their, order rates or search success rates and so forth. But I could see that reporting on the success of this would be a little bit more challenging.
If I was in your position, what I would look at, if you've got users who, this is a word processor, so I can look at the way users are actually interacting with the word processor. So you're going to send like metrics back to the central company saying, okay, this is what they did. And you'll see users just selecting, deleting, that kind of behavior where they've got, oh, I didn't really like this, I'm going to delete all the text and retype it. You can find those usage behaviors from beforehand and then release this and say, okay, the user's actually behaving differently now. That's one way I would look at it. Is what is it you can measure about the user behavior before, and to see that once you've applied this, what's the user behavior after?
Thank you. Great presentation.
Okay. Yes.
So the behavior of how the what happens when you enter text, for instance, or otherwise, there's a lot of rules there that you needed to discover in order to figure out what is the right way. What would be the thing that the user expects to happen when they do. So these rules that are driving the implementation here, would you consider those to be proprietary, or would these be something that you might be interested in publicly documenting so that other people could follow your example and for example, provide the same sort of editing experience in other contexts than Pages, for instance?
I mean, there's actually two sides to it as well. One of them is that this was tried before. If you find Mark Davis, he's probably in the next talk, but when he worked at Taligent, they also tried visual selection and it didn't work. So there have been companies that have tried, or engineers that have tried it. Yeah, it is worth definitely documenting. I fully agree. I'd love to open this stuff out. And I say it's worth the effort for me to go to the legal people at Apple and get this sort of thing published, because I think this benefits everybody. Yeah, I can't say more than that, but it's definitely in my interest, and I think any company's interest who've done this, to say this is the way right to left should work. Yeah.
Got a second question there. Also, how do you see and experience differences in the expectations of users writing different variants of Arabic, or for example, Arabic or Hebrew or other right to left languages? Or are you able to serve all of these different scripts and communities equally by the same algorithm, or do you need to adjust for what script and what regional variant thereof the user
that goes down to user
working?
testing, of course. So for example, for Persian users, they have this hidden space which joins two words without them actually linking. That's something that we'd have to consider, making sure you don't do the direction, the higher level protocol on, because then it should always be treated like an Arabic letter or Arabic script letter. Then there are cases where, let's say in Hebrew, the mathematics is entirely left to right, whereas Arabic it's right to left. So you'd want to make sure that you're not dealing with giving certain mathematical symbols the wrong direction. But with Arabic, you want to give those mathematical symbols the different direction. But those are subtle differences, and those come out in user testing. Yes.
Hey,
Yeah.
I think I'm next. So this is obviously great, but I'm wondering, so doesn't this fragment the OS more? So like now users have one kind of behavior in Word, another one in Pages, and then in TextEdit, which is also rich text editing, they have a third. You also mentioned in passing that iOS mirrored the media playback recently, which I assume is a very big change to RTL users who've had left to right media for 15 years. Like, has Apple done any kind of UX research in this direction of how this affects people?
Right, and it's so the main reason I didn't mirror the media at the time when we did this was that it wasn't mirrored anywhere else in the OS. So there are things which are, let's say, muscle memory things I didn't want to get around. The thing about this sort of visual selection is because it just comes so naturally, people don't tend to say, oh, I didn't, I'm thinking this is different. It just sort of highlights how unnatural the other world was. So I was in a lucky position there. But I remember when Apple changed the direction of the swipe to unlock because of the right to left UI, because it came after the thing was right to left, it confused me. I felt that more, but in this instance, I never really felt that difference, just because it was just that different kind of natural. But yeah, sometimes you've got to come out with this, because you can't wait for everything to come through. I mean, right now, doing the same thing on the web is nearly impossible because the DOM model for selections can't handle visual selections. It can only give you one single selection range. If I wanted to model this on a web UI, the problem there is that I can't tell JavaScript that I've got these multiple selections unless I code that thing from the ground up.
And there is a web UI for pages, right? There is a web UI for pages.
There is a web UI for pages, and the fact is that web UI for pages is modeled literally from the ground up. Because also they had certain visual requirements, but we got it working because of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Ideal.
Yeah, and then.
So, first off, I love seeing this. I know from, and I know you were there when Richard and I were talking to people in Oman and other places, and talking to real Arabic script users is an exercise in frustration. It's very, they stop working when it looks approximately correct. So this is a really interesting thing, but there are practical problems with copy paste and other things you mentioned, Dom. So I think that's in the back of my mind. It's also, I'm doing a presentation tomorrow where I'll talk a lot about Bidi isolation.
So this is specifically a word processor interface.
Right.
So we're not trying to deal with, because Bidi isolation is all about how do I put out text to the user which has been mashed up from multiple different locations. And the isolation is, okay, I'm inserting this thing inside Bidi text that came from somewhere else, and I don't know whether it's going to be fully right to left, fully left to right, where it is, but I know it should go inside this space.
Right. Okay. But I mean, the third, fourth example is you could use isolates to
we could use isolates, but the idea is I want to model that away from the user. When you're talking about a user who just wants to type a message, and you're thinking about your average user who's just sitting there tapping away, sending out a message or writing a term paper, something like that. Those are the cases where you want to keep it simple. But under the hood here, we've got isolates, we've got right to left.
Underneath it, you really have UBA running.
Oh
somewhere,
yeah, it's all entirely.
But I guess the question would be, I understand this in a presentational context like this, but and I see tables and stuff, and that I can.
Yeah.
Low battery, I'll screen.
Oh, okay.
Green now.
It's green now. It's better.
Yeah.
I guess it's where are the boundaries for this kind of editing versus, is there a point past which you wouldn't push?
Yeah, I mean, if you've got somebody who's trying to do HTML, document that has sort of markup in it or code in it, that's where you probably want to start highlighting more detailed information. But I'd see that as it's really a presentation thing, because this is a simple word processor for the masses. I keep it entirely simple. If I had like a professional use case above that, let's say somebody's using this to audit right to left text messages, then I would say, okay, let's overlay over that. Okay, here's information about where this stuff is coming from, what's going on behind the scenes. Yeah.
Thing that struck me as interesting about the transport controls, the media transport controls, was that for years I've thought, no, you don't change the direction of those, because when someone has a physical device, the VHS player, the DVD or Blu-ray player, those don't change, right? It's the same hardware that's sold in different markets. We now have generations of people growing up that never saw one of those physical devices. So is there an opportunity for culture change?
Absolutely, there's an opportunity for that, yes. Maybe then get rid of the triangle altogether and have some other symbols to say you're playing. Yeah, some emoji, right.
Okay. Oh, it's just now 5:10. So
right.
Thank you, Adil, very much for your presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah.